show where it really is okay to not be okay. I'm Rae Bonney, a workplace mental health specialist, steadfastly dedicated to bringing much needed attention to men and boys' issues, especially around crisis and suicide prevention. In my spare time, I work in private counselling with almost anyone and don't mind taking the mic to speak about all things mental health, men, and being change. It's not every girl's dream job, but hey, remember, men also matter. With only 11 sleeps to go until spring is sprung here in Australia, I've got quite a pep in my step as the sun rises earlier and our pituitary glands are getting much needed daylight to help us adapt to the new season. Now, enough of the science stuff. Today, as always, I continue to unwrap one of the greatest gifts going around, and that is people. Layer by layer, we explore the thoughts, experiences, achievements, and challenges of ordinary people bound to inspire the best you. So turn up the radio. The time is just 2 minutes past 10. And we just heard from the beautiful and talented Michelle Ciccardo with her globally popular Italian program, Fantastica, Michelle. Wonderful show. Now, last month, the world celebrated International Lasagna Day on the 29th of July. Next up in September heralds Are You OK Day and Women's Health Week, followed by International Chef's Day in October. And a real biggie for me is International Men's Day on the 19th of November. So it's for all of these reasons, recognitions and more that I've planned a literal feast of a show that in some way will celebrate all of these occasions with a few amazing people. You may have been living under a rock for the past 15 odd years if the award-winning show-stopping restaurant Attica was not known to your ears. This Ripponlea-based establishment sits in a pretty unassuming space on Glenera Road and has wowed hundreds and thousands of taste buds, eyeballs and minds with what goes down a long way from Chinatown. Look, I only said that because it rhymes. Anyway, enough of my ramblings. I cannot wait any longer to introduce today's very special guests, owner of Attica, Ben Shewry, and his operations manager / life partner, Kylie Staddon, and not to mention the children as well. We have Ella, so much for sacrificing your precious time to come on the show today, and also for bringing the kids in as well. I know you have such little time on your agenda as you race around doing so many things. So on that, how do you balance, living together, working together, playing together?
Well, I suppose, my view of life is that all things are sort of connected and that there's not a big difference between what people would traditionally call work life and what people would call their home life. I find it unhelpful to separate these things in some ways because it's all just life and you just want to do it, at a good level all the time. And my work is not a means to an end either, so I don't work so that I have, home time or home life or holidays. Like work is such an enormous part of a human's, across their life, the amount of hours that you put into work. For me, it's kind of crucial that be something that I really enjoy, and I enjoy it in the greater context of my whole life, not just, one part of it.
It's interesting. I've done a little bit of research this week. In fact, I love my research, so I won't lie, I've done a lot and listened to lots of interviews with you. But that really, really shines through, is it doesn't actually feel like work. It feels like a way of being, not just for you, but what you can actually give to your small communities and broader communities as well, with that voice around respect for the integrity of the food that you deliver, but also its origins as well. And I dined at Attica last night. I'm still full. I don't think I'm going to eat again until tonight. But what came through with the people that that make us feel so welcome in your establishment underscores for me what hospitality really is. It's not about going out and eating. It's about being in someone's home, and that's what it feels like.
There's this thing that I learned kind of early in my career about this way that restaurants can make people feel amazing. And I should also say they can make people feel terrible if they don't get it right. But I remember the first time I ever experienced that, and I was about 14, and I was working in this place called the Time Out Cafe, and it was a brother and sister who owned the restaurant, and it, like many small restaurants, it was really struggling, but they were trying to do a good thing. And I was washing dishes there, and after a period of time, I was allowed to make the lasagna, and that was a really big deal for me, as a 14-year-old to have that responsibility. And so I made this lasagna, and I remember very, very acutely the lasagna, being served. Somebody ordered it. It sort of, to me, it sort of, this memory, the lasagna floated across the dining room to the guest, and I had the lasagna and the customer in my sight the whole time, and it was great anticipation for me as it went out and it was placed, and then they brought fork to mouth, and they beamed, like they were so happy, and I was like, oh, I did that, like I made that feeling, and I could give them that feeling, and of course that gave me an incredible return, a euphoria. And that was pretty much it for me. Like that, I already decided to be a chef from the age of 5, but that moment of connection and understanding, that's what a restaurant can do. And it was like mind blowing. And I still keep that in mind, all the time now. That's the sort of the kind of whole point to it. Obviously, the project or the restaurant becomes more complicated and different layers are added. But that was that sort of initial hit, if you like, of just, oh, that's what cooking can do for somebody. That's what hospitality can do for somebody.
It's quite remarkable, isn't it? How food is such an integral part of who we are, and communities and societies all over the world. And in fact, last night I was watching carefully. I love watching people; it's my job. But George, as you know, has a dish, an emu dish, on the menu at the moment. So being a mother, I was particularly curious about people's reactions to George's dish around the restaurant, and it was just that. I wanted to say to George later, but the reaction was pretty, but it wasn't. It was just really, as you said, like people just lighting up and really appreciating it. But so 5 years old was when you first realised that you were going to be a chef.
Yeah. Backcountry in New Zealand, in the middle of nowhere.
Sheep and cattle?
Yep. Yeah, 2,000 acres of sheep dry stock, we call it, sheep and cattle farm. Then this is in the late 1970s in a place called Awakino, Taranaki, New Zealand, and just a very unlikely beginning, and then a very, very unusual childhood in the best possible ways. We've talked often about how there's different types of wealth, and my family didn't have a lot of money. It was very, very hard on the farm at that period in time, and they had a huge loan. They'd bought the farm, but they had a huge loan at a terrible interest rate, and they were really, really, really struggling. So there was never, ever a spare dollar. But one of the things that we had was, food, access to food. So that was obviously vitally important for any human, and we had beef and lamb, mostly mince, and then we had products from the environment, wild animals, like goats and boars and pigs that Dad would hunt, and we were relatively close to the coast, so crayfish, paua, we would call it Maori word for abalone, pippies and mussels, and then various different plants, berries in particular, and so that was we existed on by very simple means, and I have incredible parents, and my mother and father, Kay and Rob, are just the most remarkable people, and they were just very strong parents in the way that they set really kind of excellent moral boundaries for us, and they educated us on things that matter, but we didn't have cash, so our joy was sort of around the table or finding ways to make your own fun, and they really bred this sort of creativity in their children, and we had a lot of freedom. There was always, like I said, there was always limits and boundaries to how far you could go and how far you could push. But largely they sort of let us make our own mistakes and just see what happened, But so that was kind of the most unusual childhood because there was really no one else around. There are other people in the district and other farms, but I didn't have a lot of social interaction. I probably kind of wasn't socialized properly until I really had to go to high school, and it was a huge challenge. I'd been to a school where my mother was the principal and the teacher and the only member of the staff, and there were 7 students at the school, and 2 of them were my younger sisters, Tess and Tammy. The closest person in age to me was 2 years younger than me, David. He was my best friend in the primary school, and so that was a very unusual, very, very unusual childhood, and but wonderful. And I think Andy Warhol said that your life, while it's happening to you, it doesn't have any atmosphere until it's past. So you're doing something, you don't understand the kind of context or even the atmosphere of that experience until you reflect upon it later. And I guess in some ways my childhood was like that. Yeah.
And it sounds like that you had an enormous amount of freedom, but then isolation at the same time. And that sort of makes me curious about you mentioned you didn't really get socialised until you went to high school. Did you find that difficult?
Yeah, so difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a bad memory at all. High school was a really positive memory, but I had this condition which I guess never was diagnosed, and I still don't even know. I saw it the other day. That's what made me think of it. And that's why I say it wasn't diagnosed. But my eyes would be very watery, and so if I had to speak in front of a group of people, my eyes would water over and look like I was going to cry. And I wasn't necessarily going to cry, although sometimes I was, but it had the appearance of that I was going to cry. It was very embarrassing. And so in high school, at 13 years old, and for the first time I have to, stand up and read something from a book in front of, 20 other kids and a teacher, it was really daunting. And I'd gone from a school of 7 to a school of 400, and that seems very small in the Melbourne context, but that was enormous to me at
an adjustment.
Yeah, and the kids were like much more street savvy and much quicker, you could say, and ultimately had been up to sorts of things that you just couldn't get up to in the country.
So how did you manage through that period? Because we see the man that you are today, and clearly that you've done a lot of growing and adapting and working through lots of difficult stages of your life. But back then, when you've got very little, few tools, I guess, what was the thing that kept you buoyant?
Well, I had this one thing that was that I had this deep love, and that was cooking. And I always just knew in the back of my pocket that no matter what kind of happened, and no matter how, I was absolutely terrible at maths and science. Like, I failed so chronically, and it wasn't for any lack of actual trying. I wasn't being taught in the way that I could learn, and it hadn't been a problem for me prior to high school, but it was at high school. And there was a couple of disconnected teachers in those classes, reflecting on it, like honestly now. But I always knew that I was going to be a chef. Like, I literally, steadfastly knew that there was no other possibility in the world. So no matter what happened in high school, I had that. So that kind of gave me this sort of sense of self-belief, even though that's a very light, or that's a very strong term for what I had. But I always knew that. So I'm here, but I know that I'm on this path to something else.
Yep.
I don't even understand what that means, but I had some motivation, and so that helped me, I think, a little bit.
Something in your gut.
Yeah. And, and there were kind people at the school too. Don't get me wrong. Like, it wasn't a bunch of bullies or anything like that.
It just takes one negative experience, though, to colour in all the rest. And I was having a chat with Ella while you guys were visiting the bathroom before. Too much information. And Ella was telling me about her school and how, mental health is a really big thing for her school, and you guys are going to go in and do some work there. And Ella, I'm just going to segue to you and wondering, as you're hearing Ben, your dad, talk about his experience at school, Did you know about that?
Well, Dad tells us like a lot of stories about his childhood. It's something we've always enjoyed, so I've always like known a little bit about it, but I don't think I never really understood it. It was when I was younger, so hearing it again now when I'm older is quite different.
Yeah. And it's really great to sort of, having had that chat with you and now listening to Ben recount his experiences of being a kid, probably younger than you are now, that how far we've come in terms of, really bringing mental health into all of our settings, which is really inspiring. And we're going to talk with you a little bit later in the show about what's happening at your school as well. But Ben, what was the first thing you ever cooked? Can you remember? Well, seriously cooked.
Well, the first thing I ever mastered, like I think,
Yeah.
I remember the first thing that I failed at very well. My grandmother Elaine, she's French Canadian, and she was French Canadian. My late grandmother Elaine, and she had bought basically. She loved food, but she wasn't a tremendous cook, if I'm being honest. But she did make two dishes, and one of them was an absolute blinder. Like it was her chocolate cake, so Elaine's chocolate cake, which I've used at Attica many times throughout the years. And it's a very simple recipe. You basically put everything into a bowl, and you whisk it, and you bake it, and it's perfect every time, and it's foolproof.
And it's not out of a box.
It's not out of a box. It's just a great recipe, and I still make that cake the way that she did. I have slightly better ingredients than she did, had access to. But I'm maybe 6 or 7 years old, and my parents gave me complete and utter freedom in the kitchen. Like there was nothing off limits and nothing that I couldn't do. And having, raised 3 children myself and who are now all teenagers, that's pretty crazy that I had that kind of freedom, because kids make an insane mess in kitchen. With busy parents, it can be a nightmare, right? So
that was my question as well. Was as I was doing this research this week and realizing that, at the age of 5, you started cooking, and then at the age of 15 or 16, you moved away from, mainstream education.
Yep.
And that's George's trajectory as well. And I'm going to show you a video in the break. I've got a video of George at the age of 4 or 5 cooking. And I say to him, are you going to be a chef one day? And George typically, yep. That's the answer. But recognising that, and also, as a mother, having all hands off mess, like just go for your life, do whatever you want with mess. That can always be cleaned up.
Gift. That it's patience actually is what it is.
Yeah.
So there's two things I remember from that time. I made that chocolate cake. I'm pretty sure, I can't remember the exact measurements, but effectively it called for a teaspoon or a tablespoon of baking powder and a cup of flour, and I reversed that. So I put a cup of baking powder into the mix and a teaspoon of flour, and clearly that's like a complete disaster. The thing acted kind of like a volcano in the oven, and it bubbled all over and spilt everywhere in the oven. So that was one thing that I remember going wrong early. And then the other thing was that if you take a can of condensed milk and boil it for a few hours, then you'll have, basically a caramelized condensed milk, and it's super delicious. It's what you put in caramel slice. So I wanted to make this, and so it always said on the back of the tin how to do it, and it said put the tin into a pot of boiling water. So I opened the tin and poured it into a pot of boiling water, and then waited for it to happen, and it didn't happen. And so I was mystified about why, this didn't work. And obviously I slightly read it wrong. But the thing that I really mastered, the first thing I mastered as a child, was bechamel, which is white sauce. And that is the combination of butter and flour to make a roux, which is a French word. And you cook that out. Yep, R-U-O-X. R-O-U-X. Yep. And then you cook that out, and then you add milk to that, and you stir it until it's thickened, and then you cook it out a little bit more till you can't taste flour. And so because it wasn't a lot of food, but there was always sort of seemed to be butter, and there always seemed to be milk. And the milk was always in the freezer, because when you're in isolation, you don't have access to fresh milk. It wasn't a dairy farm. And so they would buy milk and then freeze it in the deep freeze. So those two ingredients were always around. There was often always frozen peas as well. So I would make white sauce. Sometimes there wasn't cheese. Sometimes there was. I would make white sauce, and I would do variations on white sauce. And, it might be white sauce with peas on toast, or white sauce with carrots on toast, or white sauce on toast. And I became very, very proficient this is when I'm, 6, 7, 8, very proficient at making white sauce. And I could make it, and I'm still really proud of this to this day, and I like to tease, the professional chefs that I employ about it, but I can make it with a wooden spoon and no whisk. And I can make it perfectly smooth and velvety with a wooden spoon. And that's because I learned how to do that when I was a small child. And it's a technique that not many other people can do. And everything has to be just right. But because I've made literally hundreds of times as a child, probably thousands even, and, I've got to give some context about why I'm making white sauce. I'm making white sauce as a meal for myself. So I've come home after school, and I'll make a white sauce and put peas in it and have that on toast. And this is maybe 2 or 3 times a week, right? So I'm really obsessive.
First question, though, doesn't that toast go soggy?
No, not really, no. But even if it does, it's nice. You think about lasagna, what you think about bechamel against pasta, it's not crisp, and only the top is. But yeah, a lot of people would think that's a very strange dish, but it's just a dish of necessity. It's all the ingredients that are there reliably. I used to do a similar thing where I would stir fry carrots and then put soy sauce in the wok and put corn flour and water and thicken them, glaze them. I'd have that on toast as well, which is probably even weirder. So that's my kind of that's the first thing I was really proud of, and I still hang my hat on my quality of my bechamel, which is pretty funny. I recently learned that bechamel is not a French. It's not a French
it's Italian,
preparation. It's Italian.
Yes.
Yep. Yep.
Yes, and we're going to talk about your European vacation later on in the show, but I did know that. And another, actually, Rory, my youngest son, who also likes to get into the kitchen, he has a question for you. And
okay.
He asked me if you knew what the pleats in a chef's hat mean.
I don't wear that sort of hat, but that's a very interesting question. I've got no idea. I can only kind of maybe imagine that it's definitely from France. I'm guessing here. It's definitely from France, and it's probably some sort of formal hierarchical thing that the French would do, but also perhaps it's just certainly practical to get that shape, into
Well,
fabric.
the reason I asked you, because you can apply this to your white sauce theory. So there's 100 pleats, and every pleat represents how many times you've mastered a particular recipe.
Right.
So 100 versions of white sauce and 100 versions of eggs or something like that.
Okay.
So that's what that means.
Okay.
And yeah, I could never see you in one of those hats at all.
No, maybe in my very early years I was subjected to having to wear that sort of uniform.
Yeah.
But that sort of uniform doesn't speak to me as a cook in Australia. That speaks to systems of French oppression, frankly, actually in kitchens,
Yeah. Well, actually, just want to go back to last night, entering Attica. So last night I took my very, very dear friend Mark Brown to Attica for his birthday, and that's what a great friend Mark Brown is. And Mark's sitting down and he's going, Rae, this is the best night of my life, because I'd picked him up and I had balloons and all that stuff. And because we'd entered the restaurant, Eddie had greeted us and took our coats and immediately recognised Mark's kerchief in his pocket, the label, and complimented Mark on that, and then said various other things. And Mark said, if I eat no food tonight, my night is made just by the way I feel walking in
so
here.
Great.
So he said, reflections from last night. Doing the sums, I've travelled to 66 countries on 7 continents and eaten at close to 10,000 establishments in the last 30 years. And Attica is by far the best restaurant I've ever eaten at, and the service is world class and again flawless. The staff were on point all night and anticipated every move. I've never seen team dynamics like that, either in hospitality or the corporate world. then he said, "Dear Love Chunks," that's what he calls me. "Thanks for the best birthday ever." And then he said, "Also, the food at Attica was playful, carefully selected, and the front of house staff so knowledgeable. There were also so many hidden surprises and extra special things which I will keep a secret for future diners. If a waiter was engaged in conversation with a diner and was holding plates to be taken away, another waiter would magically appear, take the dishes away, allowing the speaker not to lose concentration or eye contact once they had continued to engage in talk with the guest. That's teamwork. Never seen anything like it. Well done." And happy birthday, Mark Brown, today.
Wow. Yeah, that's going to make me tear up a little bit.
But sitting with him, it was just coming off him in waves. Just, he could not believe. Just, you are crying.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm sorry, I'm quite. It should be said, my father was a great crier, is a great crier, and I also am. But probably the reason why I'm crying is because that's realization of goals, and
Oh my God, I'm crying now too.
it's not.
Everyone's crying.
It's also somebody getting it, like on a deep level. Obviously, he's seen some stuff in his life, but that's the point of it. So that's kind of why I'm getting upset, because that's the ambition, the reason, and the effect that it can have on somebody. I suppose fundamentally, as I've gotten better at running restaurants and more experience over the years, it's been 17 years now, you realize that so much of it is psychology, and just it's still coming back to that fundamental kind of idea of, serving lasagna to somebody for the first time and them being delighted, but then you realize that there's so many different ways that you can enrich somebody's world and make their day. And the way that I always express to our staff is that, our job, some people always say a restaurant like ours, a restaurant that costs a lot of money to come to, it's not significant because it's not really necessary, it's not really needed. Who really needs that in the world? And I don't try to counter that argument, but I would say that we have this ability to really change the trajectory of somebody's day, and influence it in a really positive way. And people come in all sorts of states and moods and have had all kinds of days and lives, and maybe they had a fight with their partner, or their boss said something mean to them, and maybe they're just really frazzled. And Attica is sort of a world where that can be swept away on our best days, and we can give people this sort of sense of joy. And I mean, maximum respect to humans. I love humans. That's fundamental. So you can't be in this business if you don't find humans fascinating and wonderful. And so fundamentally, that's kind of why I do it, because it's a human interaction. We're the only species that cooks and behaves in this way, right? And so if that's not what you're here for, put this creativity aside, everything, art, whatever you want to do, if you're not here to sort of genuinely want to give people things, and for me, it's well beyond money, I sort of want to settle that at the start, and then we both agree that that's the amount that it has to be, and you accept that by making a booking, and I accept that by setting the price, and hopefully that covers everything and everybody's taken care of. I would quickly want to get beyond that point always, because I don't run Attica for the money. It's way too hard, and it's way too difficult for that to be the motivation. There's way, way, way easier ways of making a living. But it's not about that. It's about being able to create this joyous thing every day with this immensely talented group of individuals that work there. And everything is always about the team mentality there. So it's not, it's not about what, the individual, it is about what the individual needs, but it's mostly about what the individual can do for the team. And so all of our efforts are around, chefs understanding, for example, the effect that Eddie had on your friend, mentioning the pocket square, and everything is about how can we make this more special for somebody whilst finding our own joy in these acts. You know, it has to be it's a combination of the two things, right? Like it's not just about the customers. It also needs to be about the love and the joy that people get from working in a restaurant, because it's better when it's that way, frankly.
Yeah. Well, I met with Eddie recently for quite a long time, and he talked about his onboarding processes when that's when people are coming in to think about coming to work at Attica, and I just loved the love that goes into the onboarding. It's a really big thing for me in workplaces. We drag people into organisations and have this expectation we're going to get something from them, and if they don't meet the expectations, they're punished.
Yep.
Whereas what Eddie described was this real family sort of vibe around bringing people in, into the family and not testing you out, rather to see, are you going to enjoy it here?
Well, anybody who comes to work for us, like our expectation is that they will succeed, and it's partially our job to make sure they succeed. Kylie and I, we have to provide all of the tools and all of the support that's possible for them to be able to do their absolute best. And so it's sort of this, I've been thinking about this a bit lately, but I sort of view it as an inverted triangle where, less of a dictatorship and more of an inverted triangle where we are at the bottom of it and supporting upwards rather than at the top of it looking down. That's probably how I view it. Nothing can be achieved, of significance without this great team. And so that's a fundamental, and it's such an advantage as a restaurateur to understand that, though, right? Like that's actually ultimately all there is. The building, the infrastructure, that's kind of largely irrelevant because, atmosphere is important, but what's really important is human interactions, like high quality human interactions, and not just with guests, but also with colleagues, and that
doesn't take away from the stress of the environment either, because stress, people get confused. It's a normal reaction to life. We need stress to drive us. We need it to push us. So creating that environment that is stressful will push to excellence. And I mentioned to you guys before off air, being a mother of a chef, always when I say to people, yes, George is a chef, they almost apologise, going, oh, really? Is he? And it's like, yeah, it's awesome. He loves it. He wouldn't be doing anything else. But, and no disrespect to any other employer that he's had, because I'm incredibly grateful because he's had amazing mentors and role models. But coming to work at Attica, George all of a sudden has a life. He's running marathons now, and he has this whole group of people outside of hospo that he just loves, that he brings back these philosophies and attitudes back into the kitchen. And, I just love seeing that and just seeing him so loving his life. And even though he loves cooking, he just sees now that he can have more than that.
Well, your son is, is the one of the part of the future generation, so he's a young, bright, lovely young man. I'm not saying that because we're talking. I would say that to anybody, and I have. And George is somebody that wants to do the right thing and wants to achieve a lot in his life. He's very ambitious. Now, if George comes into my sphere and I'm behaving in ways that are inappropriate, i.e., my views on equality or my views on sustainability or my views on how a company's run or how many hours it's reasonable to work, if they're all like out of balance and unfair, then George moving through his life is influenced by that. And I'm acutely aware of my influence on George and of other young people in my environment. And so being at Attica, it's not just about working at Attica, it's about post Attica, it's about when you leave. And it's about understanding fundamentally, like how to run a business in an ethical and proper way, And that's partially because I don't want this cycle that we've had to keep endlessly being perpetuated, where people work too many hours and aren't paid for them, and so on and so forth. And people burn out, and we just lose too many great people. This is not a new problem. A lot of people have been talking about staff shortages, post the pandemic. It's not a new problem. It was there before. Just we there hasn't been an appetite to do anything about it, really. And so, but for me, it's just kind of a moral obligation to show people, and we're not flawless or perfect. That there's a different way that this can be done at and still be an elite level. Now, I've been criticised for, lower hour working weeks and what the effect that will have on professionals, and that's frankly I've been called terrible things and been threatened, and the thing is about that is that's always coming from a place of fear by the person that's saying that, but the thing about that is that just doesn't make any sense to me, that to be elite that you need to work 70 or 80 hours as a chef. Like that.
Well, that extends to all industries and all sectors. If I call it the Coles mentality years ago. If you're not at your desk at 7 and still there at 7 at night, you're not doing anything.
Yeah.
But look, we're going to have to go to a break because we're running over. Because we could obviously talk about this forever. But just on that, brand thing, that I love that you don't expect people to be staying with you. That you want to see them, be successful and take that success out into the world. And when we come back, we're going to be talking a little bit more to Kylie about her role at Attica and how that all came to be. And I read an article that was written actually by, when I researched the author of the article, had worked at Attica as well, and now she's in the US. Jane or somebody.
Oh, Jane Lopes.
Jane, yeah. So Jane still, even years later, is still honouring Attica and still wanting to celebrate what Attica's doing, and that's testament to having a great experience as an employee too. So, Kylie, thank you also for all of the emails and everything, setting up the show. You can see it's pretty organic, but it does take some kind of work to pull the logistics together. And you provided me with a range of songs, because I have this thing, right? It's the very special guest song requests, and you get to have all the music for the show. And by the way, I love all the songs. I'd never heard any of them before, but I really enjoyed listening to them. So you know what they are, but not in the order of how I'm going to be playing them. So what I like to do at this juncture is throw out some cryptic clues for you to guess what's up next. So here goes. This is your first clue. Something that men often get criticised for not doing, although we just saw it live in the studio. What's the story behind this song? So it could be in the title, or it could be the artist as well.
I think Ben should jump in with this one.
I am the biggest fan of music that you may ever meet. I'm totally obsessive, but I have no memory for remembering song names or even sometimes artist names, which is very bizarre.
Boys crying, maybe.
Correct.
I can't even remember the songs that we sent. I know that there was a Brian Jonestown Massacre song and an Archie Roach, Paul Kelly song.
Which have just ruined everything now, Ben, by naming them. Thank you, but that's all right.
Sorry.
No, but you can guess it's got to do with We Won't Cry by the amazing Paul Kelly. And so we're going to play that next. But is there a story behind that song, or you just like it?
Well, just that, there is a little story. Kylie and I are really, really close friends to Adam Briggs, the Yorta Yorta man and rapper. And we were up in Shepherd's Inn with Adam for Treaty Day Out, which was a really wonderful event as we work in Victoria towards a treaty with our First Peoples. And they had an amazing concert to celebrate this. And this was only a few months ago, and we got to see Uncle Archie Roach perform for the first time, and it was just really beautiful and poetic. And I just thought we should play a song because he's been such an integral part of the community. I know many people out there are grieving and would really miss him, so that's what that's for.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Well, we'll go to this 3WBC, and you're here with Rae Bonney and Ben Shewry, owner of award-winning restaurant Attica, and his very accomplished operations manager and life partner, Kylie, and daughter, Ella. So on that, Kylie, we've not heard a lot from you.
No.
We've been, that last segment just went all places that I didn't expect. And, my daily mantra is my day is not complete until I've seen a man cry. And so thank you, Ben. I don't have to go and punch my boys in the arm when I get home. So on that, Kylie, I understand, well, I've heard tell that you are the rock that keeps Attica rolling.
Oh. I don't know who said that, but that's very sweet.
But you came up through hospitality,
Yes.
didn't you, in Melbourne, and landed at Attica right at the beginning?
No, I started there in early 2014. So
Yep.
it's been a while now.
Yeah.
But yeah, sort of halfway through, I guess.
Yeah, and you were the office.
Yes,
Manager?
I started doing reservations there, so reservation coordinator, and then I moved to office manager and then to operations manager. So it's been quite the ride.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was it about Attica or the inspiration that you felt there that caused this trajectory?
I think what I really love about Attica, and it's still something that I really love, is the fact that you can, if you work hard and you have ideas, that they can be recognised and you can sort of make your own path there. I think there's a lot of places where your role's really set in stone and you do that and then you go home and you come back and you do it the next day. But something that's really wonderful at Attica and something that we try and foster is there's so many different things that you can do and you can sort of follow your passions a little bit at Attica. We have people doing all sorts of crazy projects at any one time. And that's sort of how my path led. The reservation side was really busy. So we worked hard to sort of lessen the load on that by moving to online and doing a whole manner of things. And then it freed up my time to do other things. So I started to be able to work on projects with Ben and the other chefs and the front of house as well. And you just sort of move in directions that you enjoy, and it really ends up contributing a lot to the business, I think, that people can do things within there that's not strictly in their job role, but that they enjoy.
Yeah. Well, I remember meeting you for the first time at summer camp.
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know what summer camp is, it was a pop-up that, or do you call it a pop-up, I guess?
Yeah.
Or an installation out in the Yarra Valley, which was quite remarkable for Attica. And we'll talk a little bit more about the aesthetics of it, but I remember meeting you and just seeing how you were sort of everywhere around that place, and that's where George began his journey with Attica and played quite a big role there, and I know he was quite stressed. A lot of very new experiences for George, and you were such an amazing support for him, and just really kept him buoyant, and, you know, you had solutions for absolutely everything. And yeah, that was my experience of you. Was like, thank God for Kylie is there, because you're across everything. And I think that's something that shines through, is that you, and Ben, you might want to commentate on this as well, that, you know, you've got a certain role, I guess, in the business, and Kylie sort of picks up a whole bunch of other stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, we run the company together, so it's very, you know, that's a very important thing for people to know. People think maybe sometimes that I'm on an island running the company by myself or something like that. But the fact is that I couldn't run it without her, and actually I wouldn't want to run it without Kylie either. And we have, I guess, you know, very complementary and different skills. And obviously we work together, we live together, and we're with each other pretty much 24 hours a day. And it's never, ever a problem. It's never, ever even remotely an issue. We both love doing that, don't we? You know?
Absolutely, yeah.
And so that's just one of my real joys. And but the fact is that I've got heaps and heaps of blind spots. You know, like I've got heaps of things that I'm not good at. But I'm pretty good at recognizing them. So, you know, Kylie has this completely different and complementary skill set. And it's wonderful to be in business and in life with somebody that understands that and fills gaps and sees things and evolves things. I'm talking a lot. I'm going to stop. But just quickly, she also doesn't see herself as very creative, but she's very, very, very creative, especially in problem solving, as you alluded to, and coming up with new ways of overcoming. And you know, my definition of business and restaurants is problems, not in a negative sense. It's just that's almost the only thing that we're doing every day, is just overcoming and solving all these problems, and she's a master of that.
Well, I read a post during that certain time of our lives. I don't mention the C word on this show, but you know, the last 3 years have been quite challenging, and Ben, I read a post on Instagram, and I'm going to read it out because it made me cry a little bit, actually. I wish somebody would talk about me like that. This is what you wrote. Kylie is the key to Attica's survival. As quickly as I can come up with a creative idea, Kylie's the person who will actually, capitals, make them happen. As well as running the company alongside me, Kylie is solely responsible for developing our online ordering and delivery model, from the user interface she developed with our tech partners to how and where we go. Building a new business from the ground up so abruptly is tough, but through Kylie's smarts, creativity and focus, we've been able to smooth this wild ride out. Together with the Attica team, we've come a long way since our first delivery night, and when afterwards Kylie and I sat in the car and cried. Kylie doesn't have to put up with me at work. She also has to put up with me at home too. I'm such a lucky guy to have you at my side through the good times and the bad. And then there's a love heart.
It's very sweet. I forgot about that post.
And again, it's just made Ben cry again, which is great because I can actually get a credit for tomorrow. But, you know, that's people in business. And, you know, do you know that 95% of businesses in Australia are family owned?
Wow.
95% small business, family owned businesses. And that's people getting off their ass and actually contributing to our economy. And like a family business does not get nearly enough accolades. And, you know, Ella was talking to me also before. We packed a lot in during their bathroom break, didn't we? Talking about how you've been working in the restaurant for, what, your whole life, pretty much?
Yeah, as long as I can remember.
Yeah. What does that mean for you?
Well, it's always been extremely positive for me. It's just, you know, it's always been something I've looked forward to, you know, being at Attica, being around people that have, like, experiences and stories that I haven't heard before. It's always been, you know, really exciting, and it helped, you know, grow my love of cooking. So it's always been, yeah, really good for me.
What do you cook, sweet or savoury?
It's sweet for me.
So what's your favourite dish to cook?
Probably Elaine's chocolate cake.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah, it's very.
That's I've not had that. I don't think on the menu, but last night we had that burnt Basque cheesecake out by the campfire. And gosh, people, if you hate cheesecake, you will just be blown away by this one. It's quite incredible. But I think that family thing, and it's so great that you're able to include your family in your work. I mean, I know I've always taken my kids to work. You know, I'm usually standing on a stage talking about suicide and all the really pointy-ended stuff. And, you know, my kids have always been part of that. And so, you know, even talking about mental health for them is just so easy because they've been immersed in it all the time. And I think we quite often keep our kids separate to what we do. And, you know, how many adults do you talk to? You might even, Ella, talk to some of your friends to say, well, you know, what do your parents do? And kids go, I don't know, I think my mum works in an office and my dad, I don't know, does something else. Don't really know what they do. And we can draw so much inspiration from that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really lucky to have these three amazing kids that I have, and to be able to share this with them. And it's been...
We've got Kobe and Ruby out in the green room. I can see Kobe laying on the couch.
Kobe's in a lot of pain.
His foot doesn't actually look... It doesn't look that sore, really. It doesn't. I think he's stacking it on.
I don't think he can hear you.
He can. He should be able to hear. We broadcast out there. Yeah, there he goes. Kobe, get up.
Yeah. Kobe's in a bad way with a terribly damaged ankle. This is going to be a 6-week recovery, so that's a bit of
basketball.
A bummer. Yeah, basketball, playing for the Victorian SSA state team as a vice captain, which we're very proud of him. And unfortunately, against Western Australia, he rolled his ankle very badly in the game. So, but you know, if I know Kobe, he's resilient and is already making plans to rehabilitate and come back stronger, as I've seen many times in his junior career. Then we have Ruby, who's out there. Dad's a wonderful one. You know, Ella's laughing as I incorrectly mixed up the names. I'm a great one.
Oh, I do that. I'll go through all the kids' names before I get to the one that's actually standing in front of me. Especially if you're yelling at them. It's like, Rose, Rory, George, whoever you are, just do that.
Yeah. So Ruby, who's out there as well on the sofa, Ruby and Ella, maybe you should tell a little bit about this. But Ruby and Ella did something really special at home a couple of weeks ago, didn't you, Ella?
I think I saw that.
Yeah, we did. We put on our own restaurant for a few really close friends of ours. It was called Ruella, and basically what we did is we cooked like a 3 or 4 course meal.
Yeah, you did 4 courses.
There's pizza I remember seeing.
4 course meal for like 10 people.
Yep.
All by ourselves with a little bit of help with Dad when it came to the ice cream. But so we did pizza. We made the pizza dough and the tomato sauce and everything like that, and which was Ruby's specialty. She did that.
And your Ruby?
Yeah. And then we made ice cream as well. And
like from scratch?
Yeah, from scratch in the ice cream machine. It was a custard-based one, so we had to make the custard, which was pretty difficult actually. And then me and Kylie, we made a cake, and it was sponge and meringue, I'm pretty sure it was, and it was lemon curd and cream. Yeah, so that was really good. And then we just had a platter out at the beginning with all the food on it as well.
So what was the feedback?
It was good. Yeah, it was people. The people really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
and it was really, really fun for us. Although we did leave most of the dishes for Dad.
It got too late in the school the next day, wasn't it, sweetheart? So it's fair enough.
It doesn't sound like a school night sort of activity, but so were you guys like really proud of what came out of the kitchen?
Absolutely.
It was awesome.
One of the guests said it was the best pizza that they've ever had. And I think the ice cream was a bit of a winner as well. Yeah,
that's I admire anyone who can make ice cream from scratch. I mean, you watch MasterChef and everyone's making it, but I'm a savoury cook. I'm not that great with the sweet stuff. But Kylie, I also wanted to comment. We're talking about Kobe and his rolled ankle, but you sort of get a bit hot and heavy with the martial arts, don't you?
Oh, I used to, yes. Not so much anymore, but I did for quite a while. That was a really wonderful thing to learn growing up.
Yeah. What sort of martial arts?
It was kickboxing and a little bit of taekwondo.
Oh, right. So you can hold your own?
Yes, absolutely.
Kylie's way too modest to tell listeners that she's a black belt and could basically kick anybody's ass if she wanted to.
Right. Okay.
Which is funny because we walk down the street and maybe people would assume that I'm the one that could handle myself, but I'm nothing. She's the one that she's the protector.
So you also double as security at Attica if anyone gets a bit out of hand. But also I read that you're an avid reader, art appreciator, and hot sauce lover.
Yes, all of those things, absolutely. I haven't had as much hot sauce lately as I used to, though, but I need to get back into it.
Toned it down.
Ben sometimes gets annoyed because I put hot sauce or chili on his beautifully prepared meals that are perfectly seasoned, and then I put chili on them and he's like, oh.
Here we go, yeah. Ruined that one.
Absolutely.
Now, you're also a bit of a champion for feminism.
Yes.
As well.
Yeah.
And, you mentioned to me in an email around, gender equality in hospitality. Can you describe what that looks like for you?
Yeah, I guess I've worked in a lot of places of varying sorts of levels, and I was talking to Ben about this the other day. There was one place that I worked at where I guess the owner knew all the men's names and would say hello to them, but didn't really say hello to any of the women and didn't remember our names, which is it's a really horrible thing, and that's not the norm, but that sort of stuck with me, and it's creates this division between people, and I think division's never good regardless of what it is. And Attica's always been really good with breaking down those walls between people, whether it's the kitchen and the front of house or men and women or people of different backgrounds. But it's something that I guess I've worked really hard to try and bring my perspective into it as well. I think people and teams just function better when there's a combination of people, regardless of if men or women or gay or straight or bi or anything. Like when there's more different opinions and more different experiences in the mix, then it always works better. And traditionally, hospitality, especially in the kitchen, has been a place where it's very male dominated, and that can be scary for women or intimidating for women, but it can also, I think, be scary for men and intimidating for men, because you feel like you have to act in this certain way to fit in. And women feel like they have to act in a certain way to fit into that as well. And everyone's just acting and no one's really comfortable. But we've always been really lucky to have a great balance of men and women in the business. And I think anybody that you speak to in the business will say that that's a good thing. Even people that didn't realise that that would be beneficial to them. It's just different perspectives and different people bringing different ideas, and even sometimes, like, even if there's too many women in the business, it can be a bit off as well, I think. So it's always something that we strive for. Obviously, we hire people on merit, and we're not going to be like counting who, but it's a natural progression, and I think it's really wonderful that women feel comfortable in our business, and it's a testament to how we run the business, but also the people there that they make, the men there, that they make women feel comfortable, and that's amazing, and I think they get a lot out of it as well. So,
and I think that sort of harkens back to what Mark said in his text before, the seamlessness of how people work together at Attica. Like, everyone's got each other's back.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm sort of, as you're talking, sort of running last night through my mind, and, you know, we had Drew helping us on our table, and also Giovanni. And, you know, I'm thinking, diversity is really alive there. And but there doesn't seem to be hierarchy. Like, even in the kitchen, there doesn't feel anything hierarchical.
We're all even. We're all equals, right?
I know last time I came there, you came and sat at my table for about 20 minutes chatting. I was like, sure you don't have something to do? Like, you have dishes to wash or something?
I have the least to do.
But I think that's important, and I like that, you know, I think people are the right people for a job. And we, you know, I think it's tipped a little bit too much the other way in some respects, that diversity, like I was speaking at a conference in Sydney recently, and it was very male-dominated construction industry stuff, and there was a lot of talk about diversity, but diversity, the only word that came up was women. Like, women do not represent diversity. No. In fact, you know, quite the opposite. So, you know, we need to be getting away from this idea that diversity is, you know, what's between your legs, rather than it's what's in here. And quite often what's in here as well. And I'm pointing to my heart and my head about how people want to be in life and how they want to turn up and be respected and accepted for that. So
one of the kind of fundamental things to me about coming to be at Attica is that I implore you to be yourself. You know, like, I almost demand it, because we can't be anybody else in life, right? Like, and to be anybody but yourself is to act. And the last thing I want is, especially with guests, is a interaction that's not real. So that's a real fundamental thing. In the history of restaurants, it's actually kind of largely been about not being yourself, especially in the service, especially in the front of house, where everybody needs to sort of seem the same, and it's very stiff and very formal, and there's no room for individual expression or personality. But of course, all of the best experiences that I'd had in my life in restaurants were when I felt a connection to another human, particularly the humans who were serving me. So I knew that system was broken and wrong, and that mentality was not smart, you know, like, and it's not about even, you know, I'm always about peak performance as well, right? Like, it's, you know, we're talking about the things that you aspire to be as a company and, you know, as an employer, you know, about making it a really nice environment. The motivation behind it as well is not just that. It's also that we need to approach peak performance, you know. And so it's about understanding what that is and how you might get there a different way than maybe the older system, which was a system of very strict lines, fear, and frankly kind of oppression.
But even from a customer perspective as well. And last night, you know, Mark Brown is quite formal about things, and you don't see cutlery at Attica until about course 5 or something. And it's like, you use our hands to eat. So absolutely, that's, you know, what it's like. Like, do we have to eat it in, you know, sequence? Like, not at all. And we were talking, because this week you've really helped my mental health because I walk every morning with my dog Vincent, and you've entertained me with all of these interviews that I've been listening to, and oh gosh, now losing my train of thought. What was I just talking about?
Eating with the hands.
Oh, that's right. One of my very early experiences of dining when I was very young and quite a bit of a smart aleck, I was invited to lunch and I could choose anywhere I wanted to go. And this was back in about 1980, early 80s anyway. So I chose Mietta's as my first dining experience. And that was so intimidating. Cutlery out to here, glasses everywhere. You know, they had all their livery, like the waiters. And I got there, thought, what have I done? I have no idea how to behave. I don't know what to touch. But it made me think about that last night, how your environment is, again, it's the true sense of hospitality. It's coming in to somebody's home and feeling...
It's really trying to reflect who we are or who we might be as Australians as well. That's conscious decision. And the decision to force people to eat with their hands is deliberate. Everything's deliberate.
Yeah.
You know, like there's no chance. There's not much chance there. Like we're thinking about every angle and every detail. And sometimes it drives all of us absolutely bonkers, but we're all thinking about it. It's not just me. You know, like Eddie and... Alec and Dom and Drew and, you know, the whole front of house team are thinking about all these details all the time. And the kitchen are thinking about those same details as well. And the point is, how do we kind of get to the most like direct, most human expression? But also, how do we undo a lot of like some of the things that you talked about, this anxiety about coming to a fancy place and do I fit in here? Do I belong here? You know, there's little things that we can do to basically, you know, allow people to relax and have a better experience. And kind of forcing people to eat with their hands is one of those things, you know, that says to you, oh, it's just a little bit different than, you know, maybe the formal place that if I was lucky enough to go to France, maybe the very formal place that I went into France. I don't want to keep coming back and criticising France, but we can't continue to model ourselves on the great restaurants of other places, actually. You know, we need to own, you know, Australia and what that means, right? And look to all of the wonderful things that we do in Australia and be proud of them and recognise them if we want to keep to evolve, not just in restaurants, but in all of the arts and all of the culture.
I'm just thinking back to the early part of our conversation when you're talking about being in New Zealand and being a kid and growing up. It sounded like doing a lot of foraging for, you know, these local berries and things like that. But now you're in Australia. I mean, you pay such homage to the produce here and like really unique stuff. Like, I noticed the absence of the honey ant last night. So I've gone off on a bit of a tangent there because when I asked about it, sorry, my computer actually turned off and I've turned it back on again and it started just randomly playing something. But I asked about the absence of the ant. And I can't remember, I think it could have even been George told me, the ants that you get them from the desert. And he said that, you know, the survival rate, I guess, or the rate of carnage on the way in the post, made me imagine they all come in an envelope, but was too great. And, you know, being sort of, you explain it because I've just...
Well, you know, I guess it's kind of like ants, you know, honey ants or naimanka, which is the Tupan word for honey ants, which is the word that belongs to Greg and Marjorie Stubbs, the people that have been harvesting for us.
So can you say their names again?
Greg and Marjorie
Stubbs.
Yep. It's a difficult thing to get like a live ant out of the ground and get it in the post and get it to Attica successfully. It's been a long-term relationship. I mean, a relationship we're really proud of, but we can't always get them, and so we just sort of serve them when we can. Really, that's kind of the gist of it. But that's a very, very significant cultural food.
The respect for the ants as well, and not, you know, just not taking them for the sake of taking them, I guess, was the message that came through, that, you know, they have rights as well. And, you know, if there's too many that aren't surviving the trip, well, then just leave them.
Yeah.
Which was what that was so inarticulate, and I pride myself on being articulate. but yeah, that's kind of what I meant. But, how's this transition, though, from what you had in New Zealand, which would have been quite different, to learning about Australia? Because, like, as you said, everything that is served at Attica is so deliberate.
Yeah, so I guess, whether you come from Australia or New Zealand, there's some really critical differences between growing up in the two countries. So even though we have lots in common and, we both are countries of lovely, lovely people, culturally it's very different growing up in New Zealand. And actually once had this conversation with the wonderful Jacinta Ardern, and it's growing up in New Zealand as a Pakeha, as a white person, we're just a much closer connection to culture, to Maori culture, First Nations culture, and understanding the history, the understanding that there was wars there, that the English invaded, and there was wars all around the country. And I understand the war that happened in my area where I grew up in Taranaki, and my father could show me evidence of that war by going to, like a bank on the farm and pulling out, a lead shot, a bullet from a gun, and from the evidence of pars, Maori hill forts, and culture is kind of all around us. It's part of everyday life. It's not really a big deal. It's not being made a big deal of. We spent time at the marae locally, the meeting place, and we learned how to cook hangi, the traditional earth oven. And this was a wonderful thing. Had Maori friends. I have Maori cousins, and so that's just normal to me. But at the same time, I guess I've kind of been told that it's not really the same relationship with non-Indigenous people and Aboriginal people in Australia. So I know that as a child, it's talked about in the playground, and so coming to Australia, I was sort of cautious. My mum and dad had lived in Coober Pedy in the 70s and had told me harrowing stories, which I won't repeat on here, and terrible treatment of Aboriginal people in Coober Pedy. And so I already had this sort of vibe, I suppose. So kind of coming to Australia as somebody who was sort of interested in culture, but knew, I understood some of the history, but not a lot. It was a slow experience, and scary, if I'm being honest as well, because I didn't want to be like the next white dude to do the wrong thing. And sometimes when you don't want to be that person, you can actually do more damage by not doing anything. And so I actually had at some point to accept my own ignorance and my own culpability as somebody that didn't know very much about our culture, about First Nations culture, and start to learn. And, fortunately, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are the most generous people that I've ever met. And I've felt like just very fortunate to be in this country and be around this culture and have access to it, both through friends and collaborators and through its food. So just a quick kind of story about why Attica is like it is because when I started, I come from New Zealand. It's, the bottom of the world. Nobody cares about us. What could we do that's unique? That's our mentality. This, we have this saying called Kiwi ingenuity, where we make things and they become world class. We try to make them become world class, whether it would be like selling yachts the best, or whether it be through music, like Flying Nun Records, or whatever it is. We sort of have this a little bit of a chip on our shoulder. We want to do something good. We're going to go about it very quietly. We won't talk about that being good. It'll just come out as this sort of realized product. And then people go, wow, that thing that come from New Zealand, it's kind of world class. But we will never say to you that it's world class. That's our mentality. We have a terrible tall poppy syndrome in New Zealand. So we really like to also beat down our successful people, which is really sad.
Worse than Australia.
Oh, much worse.
Wow.
Yep. So you must remain humble while being ambitious. And so it's a funny juxtaposition, because if you compared it to the American system, it's the complete opposite. And if you compared it to the Australian system, it's different as well. But what I'm trying to say is I started Attica out of sort of desperation to support my family. I answered an advert in the newspaper, and I'm 27. I really don't even know what, a restaurant is or means to me, except I know that I don't want it to be a French restaurant or Italian restaurant. I want it to speak of my personality and my lived experiences, and I want it to feel like it's of this place. And everywhere I look, there's references to other people's food. There's chorizo sausage a reference to Spain in the supermarket. There's no end of steak frites and creme brulees and risotto, but those don't speak to me of Australia. They speak to me of Italy and France. And I travelled, and when I travel, I want to eat things that feel of the place. So, in France, that's what I want to eat, but maybe I don't want to eat sushi in France. I want to eat that in Tokyo or in Japan more. It's not that you can't have good examples in cities, and we should, because diversity is really important. But just for me personally, creatively, I wanted to make something that felt from here. And because I was the strange person from New Zealand, I really felt like that I was looking through the window from the outside in on society. And that's probably the best way that I could describe it. And so I would see things that I thought were wildly exciting and interesting, where maybe everyday people weren't observing them in the same way, and I really felt that way about native foods, about the huge collection of ingredients that we have here. And I thought, well, this is really the most distinctive thing that we have in Australia. These foods don't grow anywhere else. They're diverse, they're fascinating. We don't just have plants and fruits, but we have fish and shellfish, and we don't just have fish and shellfish, but we have these very unusual animals kind of everywhere. And then as I started to learn about these ingredients, I realised about all of this history and culture connected to them, Torres Strait Islander and Aboriginal culture. And so, with all food, you can't really separate people from food. And so that started to become an important part of it as well. But it was just really this idea that I wanted to take these foods and I wanted to put my own personality onto them. But I also wanted them to represent where they came from. It was really important to me that was done that is done in a respectful way. Because that's how things, slowly move forward, I suppose, by telling stories and by sharing stories with permission always. But it just makes it more meaningful. And I really love learning. So that's kind of where it's come from.
Well, your learning translates again into the experience of going to Attica, because it's also an education. It's not about just going to a restaurant to eat food. And I know last night we were a bit curious about finger limes. Now, is it finger limes or is the plural of finger limes lime? I don't know. I questioned Giovanni on this anyway. So I'm trying to get, this grammar quite correct. But then he went on to interpret that as we wanted to know more about the finger limes so he went through the entire menu and described, like right off the bat, exactly where each one came from and its purpose in the dish. And we were just blown away to go, none of this is scripted at Attica. These front of house people, don't have a script to go by. It's like it's just so in part of their language there that people actually know where the food comes from. They know what they're serving you.
Well, caring matters. It just matters.
The feeling of being cared for far outweighs being told you're cared for. You've got to feel it. Speaking of feeling it, I feel that we need to go to a break. I was saying to somebody yesterday, I think we need about 5 hours for this show. 2 hours just doesn't feel like enough. But when we come back, I'm pretty keen to talk about one of my favourite topics, which is workplace mental health. And Ella, you're going to help me a little bit with that, and also about how Attica does address that as everyday practice, which I know we've covered a little bit already. So we do come to our we might have to drop a very special guest song request because we're running out of time. But this one, the cryptic clue, is one of the most harrowing tragedies in American history.
I can't even remember what songs I suggested.
Is it Brian Jonestown?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yes. Brian Jonestown Massacre.
How am I going with my cryptic clues? I mean,
you're going really well, but yeah.
I put a lot of thought into these.
If you ever want to see a truly inspiring clip on YouTube, Google Anton Newcomb, who's the head of Brian Jonestown Massacre, and the late
Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah, Anthony Bourdain, and you will see, Anton cooking in his studio, and it's frenetic and really impressive. He's an amazing artist. He's been through a lot, and he cooks, and it's very impressive. But it's really, if you understand the music and the story of Anton Newcomb and the Brian Jonestown Massacre than especially watching this clip of him cooking is just like, I don't know. It's one of the best things on the internet.
Well, there you go, folks. There's a lot to go away with today. So stay tuned. You're listening to 94.1 FM. It's 3WBC. To 94.1 FM, it's 3WBC. You're here with Rae Bonney and the amazing Ben Shewry. Is it Shewry? Shewry and Kylie Staddon. They're responsible for creating amazing experiences through astonishing food at Australia's #1 restaurant, Attica. Welcome back, guys.
Thank you.
We've only got like 35 minutes left of the show. It's gone so fast. This is like a time machine here in the studio. Just people go, what are we going to talk about for 2 hours? I go, don't worry about it. It will go really, really fast. I was actually just in the middle of a question, and I was asking Ben we were talking about inspiring people and genius, and I said, did you ever imagine when you were a young kid, getting into this cooking space, that you would be one of those people who people would aspire to be? And I remember saying to George a little while back about his own trajectory, saying, did you ever imagine that you'd be working at Attica one day? And he said, no. He said he remembered watching your a lot of your clips on a food channel or show was it?
Netflix, maybe?
Netflix, the Netflix series. And being just so incredibly inspired by you, and never imagining all the way back then that he would actually be working with you. But yeah, what's that like now if you reflect back?
Well, it's not even a remote possibility to think of any sort of dreams as a child. I mean, take you back to when I'm making that decision in 1982 to become a chef when I'm 5. There are no chefs in New Zealand. There are no television shows. There is no fame. There is no reason for doing this. There's no successful people. It's the worst occupation you could. It's like, really low, right? To be a cook is to do something that you've almost like fallen out of society and then come back into it, and this is the only thing you could do. That's how it was viewed, and nobody was encouraging people to become chefs, and it just it's just a weird journey, to kind of go from there. And I had no idea or even hope for being successful. I didn't even think about it. All I kind of knew is I sort of had this fire that I wanted to get better at it, and I would just work and sacrifice to get better at it. My parents had no expectation of me being successful at all, and I guess they've had a hard time with it as well. They've really gone, well, how did that happen? They didn't see it coming. And yeah, but now, I suppose it is like a weird thing, it's just where you've come from that, where there was no reason to do it. It came from a deep love and a deep passion, and that was the only reason that I wanted to do it. And it's a wonderful responsibility to have people looking up to you, and a huge honor. And it's a little bit strange as well, being honest, but it just makes you, it's a responsibility that I take really seriously, and I do want to help young people. I think it's exciting to be a part of people's lives and to try to assist them where you can, and maybe inform them of some of the mistakes that I've made, and perhaps they could avoid them by, following a slightly different path. I think sometimes those mistakes are necessary as well, but I sort of believe in living a pretty open and honest life about how things are, and not trying to glamorize it like successful or famous people often do, and
or not trying to downplay it as well and say it's terrible. Like before, my experience as a parent's like, oh, it's a terrible industry, whereas it's such a beautiful,
it's a joyful industry
to be celebrated. I remember speaking at a food festival a few years ago, and it was about the dark side of hospitality, and they wanted me to talk about this real dark, like horrible, terrible mental health burden in the hospitality industry. I said, no, I mean, we can talk about that, but we need to balance that out a little bit. And
Yeah.
you know, there are so many people doing great things, and I'm very fortunate with one of my clients who you know quite well is Robbie Bell and Beck
Yeah, he's a great guy.
at City Larder. And I started my discussions with Robbie and Beck probably 2 years ago about how we're going to approach mental health in their workplace. And it took that long to sort of work out what was going to work for them and what was relevant to their business model and how their business is growing. And, you know, I love sitting with both of those guys because they really care.
Yeah, they do.
They really,
He's a really
care.
passionate person. You know, like he's a proper guy. You know, so I call a proper person. You know,
Yeah.
a proper person is somebody that's looking at things holistically. You know,
Yeah.
not just from the bottom line. And that's an unfortunate. That's not a restaurant specific thing. And if anything, looking at the bottom line is less a restaurant thing than other industries. You know, but I think I just think, you know, that the way that I approach my career and my profession is, you know, I try to do it as absolutely as well as I can and try to live a pretty clean life on it, you know, and because I'm trying to encourage more people to see this as a calling, not just a stopgap to getting somewhere, whether you wanted to be an actor, so you worked as a waiter, or, you know, whether or not you've just give it a crack at, you know, cooking. I'm saying to people that this can be a real, you know, beautiful and deep career, and it's a great place to be, and hospitality has been an amazing place for me to be, even in the hard times, you know. But there's not an industry without problems. There's not an industry that doesn't suffer from the same things that hospitality does, you know. So we can, because we don't have, you know, an organised body that kind of supports restaurants and hospitality workers, you know, we don't really have this kind of one united voice. That's probably the one problem in a way. So it's a lot of small individual restaurants doing their best, you know. I also believe strongly in humans wanting to do the right thing more generally, you know. It's a small percentage of people that don't want to do the right thing, you know. And so
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is. And we whitewash, you know, everything's bad. But, you know, I was actually having a meeting with the Accommodation Association of Australia the other day, and they're getting me to do some work around developing some mental health programs for them. And they're a member-based organisation who recruit for predominantly the hotel industry for hospitality. So they recruit people from minority areas like Indigenous, disability, socially disadvantaged, where they will recruit people, train them into hospitality, and then put them back out into, you know, predominantly the hotel sector. And so my role is to come in and work with the management level of that to maintain and retain these people and give them a really good experience from a mental health perspective, because as we know, it's pretty brutal in that it's very fast and it's very, very transient as well. So, you know, there are lots of people really looking quite closely at how do we make this more sustainable, not for business, but for human beings and the human condition when it moves in and out of these settings. And I wanted to sort of speak a little bit more to Ella, because I know you guys, Attica's coming into Ella's school with a bit of a mental health approach. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so it's Attica x Elwood College, and it's going to be, is it 3 course?
3-course dinner.
3-course dinner for 80 people over 2 sittings. And it's going to be on their art night, and it's going to be run mostly by the students. And so basically all the money that's made from that dinner is going to the mental health services that Elwood College provides.
Great. So investing back into the community. What sorts of mental health supports will that facilitate, Ella?
I'm not 100% sure. We haven't been told much about it, but it might. They've got a few. I think they've got 2 psychologists there.
Yep.
And it might be to another room or something like that, because I know they've only got 1 proper room, but I'm not 100% sure on that one.
Yeah, well, bit of backstory on me. I was actually expelled from school when I was 15. I lived with some pretty significant mental health problems as a young child, and my behaviours suggested that I wasn't a great person. So with that, I was expelled for, you know, being very misunderstood about who I was. So we weren't talking about anything about mental health back then. So what does it look like in school now? How easy is it really to talk about how you're feeling?
Well, it's just the way schools try to normalize it. Well, not like, making it seem like normal, but like make it seem normal to talk about. Because like we've got a mandatory health class that you have to do in year 9 and 10, and the first half of that is all about mental health, and it's all about the different types of mental health, and you spend proper time learning about different services and what services are available for like the rural areas and stuff like that, and like the differences between the mental health in those two areas.
Yeah. So you learn more about like signs and symptoms and different mental health challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In terms of your peers or your friends, how easy is it for you guys to share with each other?
I'd say it's quite easy, especially since it's more common these days for people to talk about it. So it's you're not usually alone. You usually have at least one or two friends that are going through a similar thing to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And we blah on, and we put a lot of blame onto, social media, technology. From my perspective, I think technology is wonderful because it gives people direct connection into support and engagement where people are very isolated. So do you think that technology is as bad as society is painting it, or it's a bit of a mixture?
I don't think it is as bad as society paints it. There's always like bad sides to everything, and I think that people take that and just say that's all it is, but it's not, because there is, you can access services online, and you can talk to your friends online. So if you can't see that person but you need to talk to them, you can.
That's right. So any connection, especially as we develop, better services for specific things, and stigma is still the biggest killer of people. And we talk about someone's there to listen to you, someone's there to support you, but really, ultimately not. And we have to be looking for ways that we enable ourselves to manage better. And, I'm an ambassador for Beyond Blue, and I have been for the last 9 years. And, it's a really lovely position to have when, you can go out into communities and speak about, my lived experience, as well as, different kinds of approaches to enabling people to manage better. And, going back to workplace settings, I really believe that it's the workplace responsibility to create an environment that supports good mental health, safety and well-being, but it's the individual responsibility to actually carry that out.
Yep.
and really respect that environment. And if you don't fit into it, then you may not.
Yeah, I couldn't
belong
agree
there.
more. I think that's the most articulate way that anybody could describe a healthy workplace, but also the responsibility of the individual as well, which I really believe in.
That's right, because organisations are getting dumped with all the responsibility, and especially here in Victoria where we're WorkSafe now, all due respect to WorkSafe because they do wonderful work keeping people safe. But, you've got an injury, you've rolled your ankle or something at work. So you're getting to page 3, here's my injury. You get to page 4 and it's like, have you thought this could be a psychological injury as well? So, that 95% of Australian businesses being small businesses make them extraordinarily vulnerable if people aren't taking responsibility for their own safety, that organisations are getting lumped with these enormous liabilities that, frankly, just put them out of business. It doesn't take much to put a small business out of business.
No, it does not. No, it's a fine line.
Yeah. And on that, the assumption is when we see success in this, is in Australia, that tall poppy thing that you mentioned before, I think is just absolutely terrible here.
It sort of comes back to values and as well. And I will never accept somebody saying that Attica is expensive. What I will accept is that it's a lot of money, and that's what it is. But when you say that it's expensive, you incorrectly assume that that we're becoming billionaires off this small business, right? They have no idea of the cost of running a business. They have no idea what it costs to employ nearly 40 employees and serve 55 customers a night, and for those employees to have healthier lifestyles and to be working, fair hours for fair pay.
Yeah.
And for that to flow on, that attitude to flow on to all of the suppliers and so on and so forth, they just sort of label it as a thing, and without any kind of understanding of the business of it, So
Yeah.
that's a, yeah.
It is a bit like, you could compare it to, say, this is not comparable, but the Bunnings model, whereas they screw their suppliers to the bitter end to just try and get a bigger margin as possible. Whereas I know that when you're working with your suppliers, it's a whole experience. And I remember the first time I came to Attica with George, and we went out into the installation out the back, and it was, all these beautiful photographs of people who serve Attica and your suppliers, not this brag wall of, look at all these famous people that have come here, but these are the people that actually help us make this into what it is. And, money's money, but you can't really buy experiences. You've got to be part of.
Yeah, we have some really simple, old-fashioned sort of values on how we interact with our suppliers, and that is that if you're my supplier and you say you need $50 a kilo for those fancy apples, right? I'm okay. I'm right. All right, that's what you set your price at. It's not up to me to try to talk you down. We don't do that. We accept your price if we want to use those ingredients, if we think they're really amazing. And by accepting it, we are assuming that you are charging what you need to run your business and what you need to live. We're going to take those apples and charge and use them to make things, and we're going to charge what we need so that we can be a sustainable and responsible and socially conscious business and look after all of the things that matter for us. And so that's just the respect that we have. And then in addition to that, we're going to, if you don't want to be paid straight away, then we'll pay everybody all Wednesday. All debts cleared in the business every Wednesday, every week. So we don't draw people out on terms or anything like that. It's just very clean and respectful. We absolutely demand the best, mate, no bones about it. We expect, if we're paying the top price, that we expect the very best, and we can't do our work without that. So it's not just about being nice, it's about being it is about being respectful, but it's also about wanting to have the very, very best.
That's right. I mean, there is an expectation at the end of the line that your customer wants that high level of experience.
Yeah, well, it's a human relationship. You take care of us, we'll take care of you, and there should be no problems.
Yeah. Look, if the volume of food is any indication of the cost analysis, you definitely get your money's worth.
Well, and also Australians don't understand sort of the cost of, that maybe we paid $700 to $900 a kilo for ants, for example, right? They don't see them as a valuable cultural food or as a valuable in monetary sense food as well. So, that's part of our role, though, as educators as well, is to let people know about that.
But even the staff to customer ratio is fairly high.
Well, it's one of the highest in the country, probably, for any business, actually.
Yeah. So, again, hats off to you guys, literally. We're really ticking on now. I just wanted to just say a couple of things first. Some of the things that we've spoken about in the show today could bring up uncomfortable feelings for people. So if you do feel a little bit affected, help is there. Lifeline's number is 131114. Suicide callback service is 1300 659 467, and emergency services is 000. I'm going to be back on Sunday, the 18th of September, with a remarkable Scotsman. His name's Mike Hagan, and Mike and I met as speakers at this year's Managing Burnout and Fatigue conference here in Melbourne. And Mike had a lot to say about workplace mental health from his perspective as a GM for human resources at Bosch. Now, Bosch, the automotive and appliances. So in his spare time, during the past few years, Mike also put together an international posse of musical bandidos and virtual vagabonds called the Conspirators. So he collected 14 people from all over the world, and they actually produced an album to just really lift people's spirits during that particular time. And remarkable guy. We just hit it off straight away, and So he believes no one's going to understand a word he says because he's got quite a broad accent. You think Robbie Bell's hard to understand. But before we wrap up, I just want to do a bit of a skim on your recent trip to Europe. And I know Bologna rated very high. And we're going to talk about a little bit about lasagna and what I've got in the fridge out the back.
I'm going to let Kylie talk about the holiday.
Yeah, I guess we didn't realise how much we needed a break, I think, until we were away. So that was really nice. It's been like full pelt over the last few years. So actually getting away was really wonderful. It was still a pretty quick holiday. We were kind of moving around every couple of days. But yeah, we did get to see some amazing places and try some amazing food, which is always something that we enjoy, especially in Bologna, as you were saying. Ben got to go to the spiritual heartland of Bolognese, which was a bit of a highlight for him, I think. Yeah, it was wonderful.
Where else did you go?
We were in France for a little bit, Paris, Burgundy, Annecy, and then Italy, Milan, Bologna, and then we went to Zurich for a few nights.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, it's Italy is by far my favourite country in the world. I spent a lot of time there and just feel incredibly at home. So I was watching your trip with quite a bit of envy, but with lasagna in mind, and I was listening to Ben's story the other day about, his mother, when Ben was little, buying this curly lasagna sheets, the hard lasagna sheets, and finding a recipe for lasagna on the box and cooking it. And then over the years, developing and adapting that to her own amazing recipe. I'm also a lasagna fan, and I learned my bolognese from Rose and George's grandma, Anne, and Anne's from the south of Italy. And she taught me how to make her bolognese, many, many years ago. And I have since, over the time, adapted it with all these special ingredients. So I thought, I've already had a panna cotta off with you, which I'm not sure how well I went. Rosemary said it was pretty good, but it had a bit of room for improvement. So I bit the bullet yesterday. I thought, yep, I'm going to have a crack at this. I want to impress you guys with my lasagna. So I did make the pasta from hand.
Wow.
And it's got 18 egg yolks in it. Wow. And a few other special ingredients. So and I thought, I could just curl the edges of the pasta to make it like your mum's, but it just wasn't going to happen for me at all.
That pasta only comes out of an enormous machine, like a factory, I think, that my mum's, the pasta she uses. Yeah.
But, I had a lot of fun. I mean, I love cooking and, raise my kids, in the kitchen cooking. We'd try things like tripe and hearts and things like, remember this time cooking tripe, and I marinated it for hours in coconut milk and pepper, and we served it up, and it was just when Rose and George were there and we're sitting there eating, and I remember we were eating going, yeah, this is really good, and then just going, no, it's actually really bad. It was so terrible. We had a lot of failures, and I remember with your condensed milk thing, Rose, who doesn't cook, although since she's bought her own house, does a very good risotto. But Rose, I came home one night and found my Tupperware all melted at the back door, and Rose had tried to boil water in the microwave. That's Rose's cooking standard. Anyway, she came to me one day, and it was Christmas, and her job for Christmas was to build this fruit tower to take to Granny Annie's, the Italian granny. And so she wanted to get this really right. So she had the tower and she had all the fruit, but she didn't have any toothpicks. And being Christmas Day, we couldn't get toothpicks from anywhere. And I had this awesome idea. So let's use hard spaghetti. We can use that. So genius. So put it all in the polystyrene, put all the, the fruit on it. And then when she got there, she photographed it and sent it to me. All the spaghetti had absorbed the water and just gone blah, and just... It just ended up in a big mess. So we've had a few of our own cooking trials along the way. So, but it is, cooking has always just been such a focus of our family, and I'm very grateful. Although George rarely cooks for us, which is understandable given his dance card these days.
He needs to remember his mum, though. That's for sure. I'll be having a conversation with him next week.
No, look, I'm pretty lucky with my kids. Actually, they're I call them very good citizens of the world, because I really believe it's not our job to make our kids into who we want them to be. It's our job to help them into who they already are. And, you know, even though we make them out of our own bodies and they might come, you know, be growing in the same environment, everyone's different.
Indeed.
And, you know, even if, you know, it doesn't resonate with my own values or beliefs, it's, you know, it's not about me. And I think, you know...
I think it's a powerful thing as a parent to be able to remove yourself and understand that from that situation as well. I think it's very helpful for your children.
Oh, definitely. And as you know, it can be, with all due respect, it can be challenging, you know, raising children. And I also remembered my first time at Attica was with George, you know, a couple of years ago, I think. But I remembered there was another time where George is an amazing son. Even at a very young age, he would take me to places like Press Club or Vue de Monde and pay for everything. Wow. Like at the age of 16, you know, he would save up all of his money just to impress me. So like there's so much credit for George. But there was a time he invited me to go to Attica with him when you were doing the testing nights.
Yeah, Tuesdays, yeah.
And it was during a time where there was a lot of testosterone going around. There were hormones all over the place, and George had hurt my heart quite severely. And it was the night we were going to Attica, and I just thought, I can't go there with a broken heart and do that. So I actually said to him, I'm not going, you can take somebody else. So I didn't go.
Oh, no.
But I'm glad I didn't.
No,
Yeah.
but that's also the hard thing that you have to say sometimes as well, right? Like, you know, that honesty.
Yeah.
No, yeah. I certainly remember my mother, you know, being very honest with me a few times in my childhood. That's for real.
Yeah.
Better off for it.
Yeah, and you don't realise it at the time, you know, or boys in particular, their neural pathways aren't formed until, you know, 25 to 30.
You
and
listening to that, Kobe?
Yeah, Kobe, you just come and see me, you'll be right. Now get up and walk, please. But it's so true that, you know, there just comes a time, and you read resumes of men in particular, and you see between the ages of, you know, 16 and almost 30, it's just like travelling everywhere and job after job. Then all of a sudden, bang, settled. It just happens so fast. So getting to the end of the show, can you believe 2 hours almost elapsed? And
So quick.
I know, but I just wanted to say again, thank you so much. I know your time is precious, and it's, you know, I know I've got so many texts on my phone of people listening in, and, you know, I think the expectation is we might have been talking a lot about food, but, you know, just the sharing of, you know, emotion and, you know, just the philosophy behind what you guys do is just so incredibly powerful. And, you know, we've got the up and comers here, and, you know, love that we're sort of bringing that mental health conversation into in a really positive light, because it's not a bad word.
No.
You know, people will, like, if I'm turning up somewhere, it's like, oh God, this is going to be really hard, or it's going to be heavy, or but it's not like that at all. You know, talking about how we feel is great.
Yeah, it's empowering. You know, I didn't grow up with that. I had to learn it as an adult, you know. It took a long time. I think this generation is just going to be so much better off for the hard work that they're putting in now, you know.
Yeah. And, you know, and we just have to really be focusing on this stigma because people really do. They still do judge.
Oh, yeah.
You know, in the workplace, if you disclose, you know, your mental health problem, you know, you might not get that promotion. And
no, that's tragic. Yeah.
We're so scared of illness. And, you know, somebody posted something the other night on social media at an event that I'm speaking at, and they were talking all about, you know, people suffering and struggling with mental illness. And I went, can you please change that? It's not what it's about. You know, we all have our challenges, and we have our days, or we have our moments where we're not feeling as great as we normally would, but that's not an illness. It's just
It's just the human condition, right? Like,
exactly. Exactly. And, real illness is like physical illness. A mental illness like schizophrenia or bipolar is really serious and very treatable with, medication. Whereas, situational crisis where, going through those few years where, days like Valentine's Day when there's a lockdown and, hospitality industry just goes on its face, that can cause people to feel enormously challenged. But that's not illness. That's just life.
It is. Couldn't agree more.
That can make people feel really bad. So what's on for you guys for the rest of the day?
Going to a friend's house for lunch, actually.
A rare occasion
nice.
where somebody else, a non-chef, is cooking for us and our family,
so
which
we're
is
excited
really
about
lovely.
that.
Yeah.
Oh, you can take a lasagna with you.
Again, well, that might be dinner tomorrow night. So, yeah.
It'll keep. That's
Okay.
that's for sure.
Okay, that's very exciting. We're very honoured to eat your lasagna. I have a philosophy on lasagna. There's no such thing as a bad lasagna. I'm not making any early judgments about yours, but all lasagna is good. I can find a redeeming characteristic about all lasagna, even lasagna in culinary wastelands such as hospitals and ski resorts and aeroplanes. I can still find something that I like about even those most commercial and mechanized lasagnas.
Well, bechamel sauce is a no-no for us. We don't go there with that. It's it's
wow, that's interesting.
Is it ricotta?
It's controversial.
no, nothing. It's cheese, tomato.
Okay.
Yeah, lots of different variations of tomato in there and a few of my special ingredients
Okay.
that I grow in my garden as well.
Very, very nice.
I'm no green thumb, but I can grow bay leaves and I can grow mint. There's no mint in it, by the way, but that's all right. That's all right. So coming up next, we have Paula Hogg with a very lazy Sunday afternoon. She hasn't arrived in the studio yet, but we've come to another very special guest song request. How many have we played so far? Two.
Yeah.
So we've only got room for maybe one more. If Paul is late, I can make them back to back. So, do you know what else we've got to go? I've got to put my glasses on here so I can actually see.
Mine like a sieve. I can't.
No.
Oh, actually, was it?
We
no.
had one
oh,
song
Sigur
that-
Rós, was it?
Well, actually, there.
No.
I'll give you. I'm going to give you the cryptic clue. It is about. I'm going to go back here. Right. An over-the-counter antacid brand with main ingredients being sodium bicarbonate, sodium carbonate, and citric acid. It's a very weird, as I said, is cryptic. So think of that. Think of the artist.
I'm going to hold Kylie responsible
Oh my
for
gosh,
sending
I'm
the email
thinking.
off because I can't possibly be held to account for my incredibly poor memory.
Brian.
Oh, Brian Eno.
Eno,
Oh,
yeah.
man, this is actually one of my favourite all-time songs.
Do you get the
This is-
association that the Eno?
Yeah.
This is just the most incredible song. I find this song so hugely motivating and beautiful.
Well, tell us about it, Ben, to take us out.
Well, I can't even know what it's called, but what is
It's
it
called The Big Ship.
The Big Ship. Yeah, I just think it sounds like I always just want to make a film with this music. That's every time I hear it, and I feel like I could do anything when the song is playing. I could ride, I could climb a mountain, I could create a really great dish. That's how music is for me, and this song is probably like one of my all-time favorites.
Wow, that's a. Do you have any aspirations to make a movie?
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
Is that another show?
No, we actually are secretly working on something at the moment, which is not the sort of movie you would think, but it's really kind of a revolutionary idea, I think.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, we'll keep that under wraps until next time. Until then, folks, please be safe. Take care of yourself. Take care of others. And most importantly, just be kind and just care, because there's no better antidote to making others feel great. So here we go. This is The Big Ship by Brian Eno.